While the hearing has been over for several months now, there are still many questions left unanswered regarding Ford's accusations as well as Kavanaugh's appointment. The purpose of this video was to start a conversation between students and staff regarding Kavanaugh, the job of Supreme Court Justice, and the validity of public opinion. The first question our interviewees were asked was if it would be better for Supreme Court justices to be publicly elected or executively appointed.
Yeah, so I think this question is kind of a question of how our government is run as a whole, whether it's a true participatory democracy. There's different things like that, but the way that the people are represented in this way of choosing a Supreme Court justice is through the president. So by voting in presidential elections, people decide who the president is going to be, and in turn, that is decided by the president who the Supreme Court judge is.
The ability of presidents to choose people who align with their ideological philosophies has always been, but the approval actually comes from Congress, and congressional representatives are elected by the people. So in that way, citizens have the right and to voice their opinions. If the congressmen and representatives don't do what they ask, they have the right to vote them out.
I do not think it's a good idea to have judge nominations be influenced in any way by elections. Just for the fact that bias can come up in that also. I get your point about the bias of the president, but I feel like that's something that can't be avoided.
I don't know about an election with the same way we would vote for president, because maybe the people don't know who would be a good fit to put on such an important position, but maybe there could be some way to involve other groups in making the decision.
Our interviewees believe that elections were not necessary in choosing Supreme Court justices, but also believe that there should be more involvement from the government in deciding who gets appointed. The public was one of the largest factors shaping beliefs regarding Kavanaugh and Ford. Interviewers were then asked if the public maintains any validity in debating national issues, or if it all just devolves into mob mentality.
I enjoyed watching how the discourse evolved, and I think there was so much reason to everyone's perspectives, and there's logic from both sides, and it's just it was fascinating for me to see. I don't know, I wouldn't call it mob mentality so much. I think that people had strong positions, and while some people might be just following what they heard or what the talking point is, I think that there was a tremendous amount of discourse in the country around the issue.
It all boils down to whether it happened or whether it didn't, and I know that it's really hard to gather evidence because it happened so long ago, but when we're talking about these kind of things, when an accusation is made, I don't think people should jump to defending the person who made the accusations or defending the person who the accusations are being made against, because unless you were there at that party, you don't really know until the proper investigations are done, and then we can make a decision through that. So I think it's something that's very dangerous to just jump to conclusions about anything, about anyone, regardless of political party and ideology. We should always judge people off of the facts of whether they did something or not, and not on just who can scream the loudest in the public eye.
Public opinion is good at giving a voice to those who aren't usually heard. But is it important to note that truth and fact must always come before opinion? Our interviewers were fine with keeping the appointment process for the Supreme Court. They had a different response to whether the terms of the justices should have a cutoff point. There was a great interest in having better representation and a flow of new ideas throughout the Supreme Court, and our interviewees felt that having temporary terms would help with that.
Just kind of like how I think a justice should be elected, like how a president would be elected, then I think there should also be a cutoff point, just kind of like a president. Get new ideas in the justice system.
It would be nice to have maybe younger people, like a more variety of ideas, as opposed to who every couple presidents gets to choose.
Interviewees were then asked if it was right for people's belief in Ford to take precedence over the truth given by our court system regarding Kavanaugh.
I think what she presented warrants additional investigation. Personally, I'm not sure that they went far enough in the FBI. And I don't know that I would characterize it as mob mentality. I think a lot of people are tired of things that are being done in the name of fair investigation, and when in fact it may not be that.
Mob mentality, again, is something that's very dangerous. And our system was built on rule of law. If you look back to the, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Salem witch trials, but it was something that happened where people were accused of something and not given due process, and were ultimately killed for something that was false. And so that's just one example of how mob mentality and public opinion always isn't right, and it's why it's so important to go through the proper channels, a thorough investigation, coming to a conclusion, and then you can make judgments off of that once you know what actually happened.
The whole issue really came around if you can get away with it and nobody knows it didn't happen. And I think when we look at the system that Kavanaugh came from the university, from the what happens at Georgetown stays at Georgetown, I think there's a lot of legitimacy to her saying this happened. And I think that, yes, he defended himself, but I think it was right for this to be brought to the surface, given the nature of the accusation.
It is easy to defend and accuse those we are not closely associated with. Interviewees were asked if they would defend someone close to them with similar accusations to Kavanaugh.
No, I would want to. It would depend on the situation, the nature of the accusation, and maybe why it had come up. And I would not necessarily be quick to defend them. I would want to see for myself what I believed and whether I chose to believe the accuser or my friend. And maybe I wouldn't defend them.
I believe very deeply in innocent until proven guilty, and I think that, again, with the information age we live in, people are very quick to make judgments, and I personally lived through some of that myself. And until you hear both sides of the story, you can't reach a fair and just conclusion.
I feel like a lot of people in this case were just kind of jumping to conclusions, and there wasn't really any clear evidence on both sides, like the political spectrum. But I would analyze the situation more.
The political landscape is important to note here, since it has major influence over what people believe about Kavanaugh and Ford. We asked our interviewees if their own ideologies influence their answers at all.
Yeah, I feel like it does for everybody, no matter how much you try. People tend to justify their opinions instead of form their own opinions. Usually two choices are laid out by public opinion, and you take one of those and justify it with your own rational thought instead of like you thinking of it yourself.
That's difficult because obviously this is a very political thing, so depending on your political ideology, you may want to jump to conclusions for your party for that immediately, but when you step back and take a look at the broader picture, I think, again, you just have to wait and just see how things play out.
I would like to think that it doesn't. I would hope that we believe women when they come forward, or men when they come forward, in any case where there's been harassment or innuendo or something horrible has happened to someone. We need to trust them and believe them.
The last thing we asked our interviewees was whether Kavanaugh's questionable presentation at his hearing was valid in determining whether or not he'd make a good Supreme Court judge.
I think it's valid. It's valid to be concerned, absolutely. I mean, you look at the interview and the testimony, and I think that all those points you brought up do raise some questions that are valid. Now, what happens with those questions from now on is up for, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think there were definitely some questionable actions and responses in that testimony.
I think judges need to be able to handle heated situations better, and the way he handled that wasn't necessarily the best way. Although he was being accused of something, so I feel like I would also maybe be heated if I was accused of something that could potentially be false. So.
And that's the hard thing about all this is when there are two people that are obviously very passionate about both sides of this. Obviously you don't want to just automatically assume Kavanaugh's innocence, but you don't want to automatically jump to believing Ford. But they're obviously both very passionate about that. So
There is no real answer regarding Kavanaugh and Ford. The purpose of this video was to fuel your interest in finding out more about this issue. Learn and listen to everyone. Then decide for yourself what to believe. Thank you.